All right, episode 30 in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast, episode 30 of the Noel Casler podcast. We appreciate you guys listening. I'm back here with my main man, Jimmy Kennedy. We're going to get into it here in a minute, but let's say hi to Jimmy. Jimmy, how you doing today? You got your blue Indiana colors on?
Yes, sir. Indiana Pacers back in their ABA days with the ABA design. So we'll see how they do this season. The All-Star game is supposed to be in Indy this year, so that'll be exciting.
That's right. Remind me to get you tickets, Jimmy.
Yeah, got to get to the All-Star game.
I'll hook you up, man. Those are my homies. It's like my family that does that show, the halftime and all that stuff. So we'll find something fun for you to do. Make sure you get in there. There's 3 events. The Sunday night game is almost anticlimactic. It's like the rookie game on Friday night, and obviously the slam dunk contest is really fun on Saturday night. By the time you get to the All-Star game, you're pretty burnt from doing that. The differences between the Super Bowl and the All-Star game weekend?
What are the differences?
About 800 pounds of weed.
Yeah, that's probably about right, dude.
I don't think you have any idea what's about to come down on Indiana. It is a party, dude. It is like Mardi Gras, one of the funnest weekends you could have, man. I was sober doing them all, but like, it doesn't matter. It's just a good time. People come to celebrate, and it's a really good time. So the Super Bowl was lame when we were in Indiana. Let's be honest. It was freezing rain. It's kind of a boring town, but the NBA will bring its own flavor, so you guys will have a good time.
Oh yeah, of course.
All right, so let's get into it. Not to diss Indiana, now we're gonna get letters, but hey Jimmy, I was at my theater yesterday that I'm playing next, the Wall Street Theater in Norwalk, Connecticut. This theater is killer, bro. It's been renovated. It's beautiful, great lobby, great facade, incredible stage, incredible house with a couple balconies and stuff. So I'm playing there November 18th. It's a Thursday night. It's election week. It's going to be a really good time. I'm going to bring the fire. If it's anything like Annapolis, man, don't miss this thing. If you're a fan of the podcast and you sort of like my take on things, come on out to a live show, because it's not, it's funny. It's not me ranting, it's fun, but there's a message in there too. But I humbly ask you to attend November 18th, Wall Street Theater. So that being said, there's a lot to break down this week. I guess we should work backwards. It's like you got another Trump rally today in Georgia, which is just insane. And people camped out overnight to attend today. They were showing up yesterday, which shows the cult-like nature of this guy. Rural and semi-rural and sort of suburban white America that fell for this dude had no chance. Okay. And I know a lot of these guys, like if you sort of like got your learning from your grandpappy and your pappy, and the whole thing was jingoistic, waving a flag, we're hardworking Americans, the immigrants are coming to take your job. If that's the reason you think there's 3 broken down cars in your front yard, you don't have a chance at a 75-year-old from Queens who was doing mob business for 30, 40 years, because Trump can spot a mark from a mile away, and these guys are making it easy for him. And they're being manipulated so hard now. It's embarrassing. I often wake up and I'm just embarrassed that I'm part of this country, like, to be honest. And there's a lot of good people here. It's fucking embarrassing. People are stupid, and Trump is like the king of the stupid. And the scary part is what you see happening at all these board meetings across the country. I just watched a fresh batch of videos from this week, of these people disrupting, or trying to break into school board meetings and standing outside the door and screaming. That's weaponized hatred. Those guys, it goes beyond Trump. Those guys have been weaponized by Putin and Facebook, right? And we learned this week that Mark Zuckerberg cut a side deal with Jared Kushner over dinner while Trump was in the White House, that they wouldn't put any kind of disclaimers on political ads on Facebook, on all this conspiracy shit, in exchange for like a lack of any sort of oversight. You know, so Mark Zuckerberg cut a deal so he could retain his $1 billion, who also, by the way, in a settlement they had to pay out, paid an extra like $100 million so Mark himself wouldn't have to testify or be liable, you know, or get deposed or anything. Like, so his own shareholders are suing him for that because he basically overpaid to protect himself, you know, in a legal settlement. So, you know, Mark Zuckerberg is a Bond villain. Okay. We've known that since Harvard days, right? He invented the thing to rate women on campus because he was a dork who couldn't get laid, you know? And what happens to so he was, in many ways, he was the first incel, right? The first, you know, mediocre white guy who weaponized social media to make himself feel powerful and intertwined it with misogyny, right? You know, and Trump is you know, a born misogynist. His whole thing was misogyny, you know, Miss Teen USA. What the hell is that? You're going to fly in 15-year-old girls from all over the country, put them in a bikini at Atlantic City and get middle-aged men to judge them and say which one they think is the winner. You know what I mean? Like the winner, that's the one you want to sleep with the most. You know, that one's the hottest. Like, it's insane to begin with. And we're a culture of misogyny and patriarchy and just, you know, unemotionally matured males, you know, and they've traditionally run this country. And so, you know, Facebook, by not putting disclaimers on this stuff, allowed these people to be weaponized. You know, all this anti-vax, don't wear a mask stuff, that's a direct result of Facebook. And that started before Trump even came to office. You started hearing about that around the Tea Party era, you know, because the Koch brothers also saw there was a lot of money to be made in radicalizing this base of sort of middle class, lower middle class Americans, and upper middle class too. You know, now everyone's in on it. You know, right. Like, I know really wealthy white people that are full on MAGA guys. Some of them are just skeptical New Yorkers who care about the stock market. You know what I mean? And they're misogynistic too. And they were sort of groomed to hate Hillary forever. And they're sort of quietly racist. You know, they're like New England racist, you know, where you belong to a nice country club and you just don't hang out with any people who aren't other white wasps, you know, and you don't consider yourself like a shit kicker racist, you know, like putting on a hood like they do down in Indiana, right? One of the capitals of the KKK. I guess I'm going after Indiana today, but you know, my point is this stuff was weaponized and now these guys are soldiers. Okay, these people that are attacking these school board meetings, these idiots that were in Arizona the other day, still having these rallies about the recounts, right? And Trump lost. Like, all that, the only result of that was that Biden got more votes. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But that's where we're at, Jimmy, and it's dangerous. Okay, and anybody who's asleep on it right now is going to be in for a rude awakening during the next election, the congressional, and God forbid, you know, the presidential election that's coming in 2024. I mean, I shudder to think about the hell that this country is going to go through.
Yeah, man. I think the thing that really concerns me about the whole Facebook debacle is, like, you had the micro targeting that we've talked about on this podcast before with Jared Kushner getting his friends from Silicon Valley to target specific sections of the country, right? This wasn't an onslaught that went to 300 million Americans and only 10 million of them bought in. It was specific to an area because the GOP knows they still have the Electoral College. All they have to do is locate these little pockets. And instead of having to target, like I said, 300 million people, you only have to target 25,000 people and hope that 5,000 of them don't show up. That's how slim these margins are becoming. And if the popular vote were the determination of the presidential election, we wouldn't have to worry about that as much. But the Republicans know that.
And it should be the popular vote. Having it be the popular vote is the only way that we could really defend now against sort of claims of voter fraud. Because part of the problem, you know, is that you can't say that the Republicans cheated now, which I believe they did in many districts. I don't think Lindsey Graham has won a fair election in a long time. You know, I have questions about Mitch McConnell, but you raise those questions and now the Democrats will attack you. You sound just like QAnon. You sound just like conspiracy. When in reality, like, the Republicans have been cheating in elections since 2000, right? You know, Gore, Bush. 2004, Diebold, whatever the company's name is, like promised to deliver the election for Bush in Ohio. It's a conservative Ohio-based company that's now changed its name, but they make a lot of these election machines, right? So the Republicans were pulling hanky stuff, Governor Kemp, who was a Secretary of State, who made it an unlevel playing field for against Stacey Abrams. Ron DeSantis down in Florida. So these guys have been getting into office by cheating for a long time. And now you can't even call them on that, right? Because they got in front of that issue. And that's what Trump does. It's like the pedophilia stuff. Trump knows he's a predator. He knows he slept with underage girls. The people close to him know it. Putin knows it. He's got fucking tapes of it, right? From Trump doing it for decades and Jeffrey Epstein. But you type in Trump and Epstein into Twitter and you're going to get hit with bots and MAGA people going, Biden's the pedophile. No, he's not. You know what I mean? That's insane. But so my point is, that's the danger, is you're not even going to be able to call them on these districts, right? And now the Republicans are becoming secretaries of state in all of these counties, in all of these states. Right. So the guys that supported that Trump actually won and the election was fake are going to be in charge next time. And what do you think they're going to do with the results? Right. And to go back to your point, about Facebook and the micro targeting, I don't think a lot of people ever really grasped that, but that's what Kushner did. Kushner and Jared overlapped. I mean, Kushner and Mark Zuckerberg overlapped at Harvard. Okay, they were there at the same time. They're 3 years apart. I think Kushner's 37, Zuckerberg's 40, but they were in the same, era of Harvard guys that went out to Silicon Valley and made a fortune in social media, right? So Kushner called up those guys in 2016, as I've said often, and said, how do I get these guys in Michigan, that voted for Obama, that work a union job, but also have a pickup truck and listen to Kid Rock and, probably skew racist and play Call of Duty or whatever it is, have a bunch of guns. It's not easy to pick out who you got to target. And then they started hitting those guys on Facebook, conspiracy stuff with that Hillary's running a sex ring and a pizza parlor and Hillary's emails and Benghazi. Trump killed 600,000 Americans as president. They don't mention it. Right. But they mentioned Benghazi dudes have tattoos of Benghazi on themselves. You know what I mean? And they're weaponized in a way we've never seen before. We're in uncharted territory. January 6th was insane. And that was just the beginning. As I said at the top of the show, Trump's having a rally tonight. Okay. The guy who got thousands of people to attack the Capitol 8-9 months ago is having a party tonight in Georgia. He should have slunk away in the distance. He should have been arrested on January 7th. Okay. He should have been perp marked, out of there, perp walked, but they're not going to do it, and everyone kind of knows they're not going to do it. That's the scary part now, is that people will say, oh, just, hold on, justice is coming, justice will be served. No, he's 75 years old, dude. He already got away with this stuff. Even if you arrest him tomorrow, what is he going to go to jail for? 5-10 years? Do you know what I'm saying? The dude started raping people in the 70s. He started laundering money for the mob in the early 80s. Okay. The guy has been a scumbag forever, but he's basically untouchable. Okay. And a lot of people don't want to admit that at this point. They don't want to admit that the system that protects Donald Trump also protects them. Okay. And if you start pulling on that, that stitch in that sweater, the whole thing unravels. Right. So people are like, well, we kind of got to let him do that. Right. Merrick Garland, all these guys, they're kind of like partial to the Federalist Society, Christopher Wray, all these guys. So they're just kind of like, well, what are we going to do about it? Right. Let's just go back to the way things were. There is no going back to the way things were, Jimmy. Okay. Atlantic City doesn't get to be pre-Trump Atlantic City. After he goes there, opens a bunch of casinos, runs them into the ground. They have to demolish the buildings, and then they have big pits of empty land, right? That's what Trump has done to this country. He's pockmarked it. He's laid landmines from one coast to the other that will continue to explode. People still die in Cambodia 40, 50 years after we stopped being there because we left the landmines in the jungle, and little kids walk over them and lose their limbs. Politically, that's exactly what he's done. That's what we saw with Afghanistan, a tripwire, right? That's what we're seeing with Haiti, right? How did 15,000 people end up at the border in Haiti? You know, because they were in Brazil working after the Olympics, and somehow somebody went down there, perhaps Jason Miller, who was just there 2 weeks ago, you know, and gave instructions for these guys to end up under a bridge in Texas.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing that really concerns me even about this January 6th, you know, House commission. Like, part of me has hope because you have Liz Cheney there, you have another Republican there. But then the other part of me is like, the GOP's involved with this. You know, how big of a scope of an investigation are they actually going to do? Because nobody on that side wants to rock the boat. You know, yeah, Liz Cheney believes in democracy, but she went along with practically everything else. You know, I don't see anything coming of it. You know,
yeah, nothing. They got, well, you'll find out. They subpoenaed these guys. If Mark Meadows shows up and testifies, if Kash Patel, Steve Bannon sits in front of Congress, you know, he's such a narcissist that he may, you know, Bannon may do that because he knows, like his boss, there's no such thing as bad press, and what, he's already been pardoned and stuff, you know. The dude had a meth lab in Miami at one point. There's a great article on this house he was living in Miami. I mean, he's just scum of the earth, you know. And the Haiti thing will go uninvestigated, right? We've moved them out of there now, but Fox News is still running these pictures, you know, of these guys living under the bridge. We had one of the most despicable things I've ever seen in American history, which was the guys on horses whipping, you know, with their reins, whipping at fellow human beings, you know. And a lot of people don't even understand Haiti. You know, Haiti got its independence from France in the early part of the 20th century, and they had to pay reparations to France. They were slaves. They won their freedom, and France was like, okay, you can have your freedom, but you got to pay back all the slave owners for the money that, you know, they invested in you, essentially. And that's why Haiti's never been able to recover economically, you know. And then they had all these corrupt dictators, Papa Doc and all these dudes forever. But, you know, it's the same sort of like colonial white supremacy racism that has screwed the beautiful people of Haiti forever. And my grandparents built schools in Haiti, wells, you know, host all these Haitian priests and stuff all the time. My grandparents have deep roots in Haiti. They're not missionaries or anything. They're just good people that spent their retirement kind of down there doing what they can do. And I've gotten to work with a lot of Haitian artists, from choirs to Wyclef and stuff. There's such a beautiful spirit in those people, you know, or in Haitians. I don't mean those, you know what I mean? Like, they would make Texas much better, is my point. Let them in, learn something from them, treat other human beings with love and compassion and respect, right? Go beyond the programming of, they don't look like me, can't let them in here. You know, first of all, you stole that state from Mexico to begin with, okay? Texas, no one's ever suffered from self-mythologization, you know, more than Texans. Right? They've always been like, don't mess with Texas, we're great. Right now, you're taking your orders from a 75-year-old dude from Queens, New York in a diaper, okay? And he's telling a little rabid weasel, you know, what to do. And Texas is about to do its own recount on the election. You know, they don't have Governor Abbott is a yo-yo controlled by like right-wing extremists and oil companies, okay? And he's got no moral backbone. You know, he tweeted yesterday that like COVID cases were at their lowest point in 6 weeks. No shit, because the people are dying. You know what I mean? Your beds are opening up because people are now dying of COVID. It's despicable. And people need to look at the myths they've been sold, right? You know, we've discussed it all the time on the show. Every time I say something about Texas, stop criticizing us. There's a bunch of good people here. No shit. But it's a generalization, and you good people haven't done fuck all about it at this point, right? You're not surrounding the Capitol in Texas. You haven't stopped any of these things. They're pulling draconian stuff day after day. Don't get on my Twitter and get in my replies. Do something about it. I'm going to keep calling you out on your bullshit. You know, do something.
Well, and Governor Abbott, when these anti-abortion bills were put through, he's like, we're going to stop all the rapists. Oh, afterwards, you know, like, he's that way. And, no, I don't know if you know this about me. We've talked about it before, but one of the best things I've ever done in my life to this point is volunteer for a organization out of Indianapolis called Timmy Global Health. And a lot of the work that they do is in Haiti, like it's an entirely different level of poverty. And then you have a hurricane or a natural disaster hit a place like that. It just adds to the suffering for a place like Haiti. And we saw how Trump treated people at the border and Puerto Rico. They're still in shambles. It's not a surprise that these Haitians were treated that way by those law enforcement officers, because that's the kind of behavior Trump tolerated.
Well, I know, because Haiti's always been the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. And the main reason is that won their freedom, and then had to pay back their slave owners. Like, that's insane. Enslaved people ownership. And you're right, they never recovered from the earthquake in 2010. I did a big fundraiser with George Clooney. He organized this massive fundraiser, and we did a big live telethon, and we had Sting and the Roots and all this great artists, and raised a bunch of money. And Americans kicked in a bunch of money, and the Red Cross basically kept it from themselves, right? So this last hurricane and earthquake, people are like, don't send money to the Red Cross, right? They siphoned off the money and paid their own salaries and paid for their big headquarters in DC, another grift. It wouldn't take that much money to cure Haiti. And if these were Cubans, they'd be welcomed with open arms in South Florida, because they'd be hardcore, right wingers who would vote Republicans. If those Haitians, if they thought that they would be Republican voters, they'd be setting them up in Texas, right? They'd be taking them in. They're politicizing human beings and human suffering. Okay. And it's so cynical. The whole thing, Mitch McConnell, the fact that nobody's ever gone after Mitch McConnell, who's basically owned by Oleg Deripaska, who owns a company called Rusal, which is Russian aluminum. Okay. And it's direct ties to the Kremlin. He was the go-between, when Paul Manafort was getting all this Russian money and Russian interference in our last election. The two guys who voted to not put any further sanctions on Russia were Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul, from Kentucky, because they're promising to open a factory, which is yet to open in Kentucky, but it pumps money into the state, and Mitch McConnell knows he's untouchable, right? He just continues to screw with the Democrats. He's going to vote against raising the debt ceiling, which he did himself 33 times. It's the same thing. If a Republican, when Trump was in office, what did he increase the debt by? $7 trillion or something, and their buddies all took it. Steve Mnuchin and all these guys cut themselves fat checks and rode off into the sunset. And we got to get angry as Democrats. And I don't mean this anger of spittle and flecked MAGA idiots showing up as Karens in CVS, but we need to get intellectually angry and examine a country that has created so many dumbasses, right? We always laughed about this stuff, but it was never funny. It's not funny to let Reagan do what he did to this country and defund the arts, and deregulate mental institutions and create homelessness, to allow the NRA to become a terrorist organization, warping the minds of Americans. You don't need guns. You don't need guns in the numbers you have them. You don't need weapons of war, right? There was a mass shooting this week, got zero coverage. It was in Tennessee. Somebody walked in, shot 13 people in a Kroger. One person died. It wasn't in a single Twitter feed of mine, because we've been only one person, right? It's a mass shooting. It should be horrific to every sentient being, but we've accepted it. And that's the point I'm trying to make is that Trump knows that he'll wear people down, and eventually you will accept these things that at one point were unacceptable. That's what happens in addiction, right? If you're an addict, an alcoholic, and a drug addict, you think I'm never going to do that. And then you find yourself doing that, right? It's a moral degradation. And that's what's happening to this country. We're being demoralized, and we're allowing these cynical old white men and kooky younger women, Marjorie Taylor Greene attacked Representative Dingell on the steps of the Congress yesterday, where I used to work as a courier, on the steps, called her a baby killer. You know what I mean? You think Marjorie Taylor Greene is a Christian? You think she really cares about right? Unborn babies, all these Texans that are so anti-abortion. You didn't give a shit about these Haitians that are sitting there with their babies saying, my baby's hungry, and just walked across a couple, continents and countries to get here. Where's your Christian hearts right then? Where were you, bringing them into your homes and feeding them? That's what they did with Jesus and Mary.
Right.
Right. You're not Christians. You're terrorists. You're terrorists. Okay. You're a white supremacist terrorist if you're a member of the modern GOP, period. And if you're listening to somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert, it's going to not end well for you. Those are crazy criminal people that are very bad and being manipulated by powers that you can't even comprehend because your little mind never got past a pickup truck and a fucking gun and a stupid flag, thinking you're some hero because you fought in a war for an oil company.
Well, I heard Malcolm Nance talk about what had happened in Afghanistan. And, I care about those 13 soldiers and what happened to them that day. But it's really disappointing when you see Jim Jordan or these other chaos agents every day caring more about 13 soldiers dying in a battlefield than their own damn constituents in their own district. Like, I get it, but it's just a divide. It's further divide people, man.
They don't care about these soldiers. They care about the fact that they can use these soldiers to gin up this false patriotism in easily manipulated people. Because then they'll put a picture on the pole in the town and you say, salute our heroes. And you feel good about yourself and you share the videos. Not that they're not heroes, okay? But like, a lot of people join the services because they don't have any other options. That's, it's not rich kids going to fight wars. Some of them end up going to the Naval Academy, or West Point, and then they become Mike Pompeos. They're doing that for political power. They're not the guys on the front lines, right?
Yeah.
But so it's cynical. Jim Jordan, these guys are scumbags. Dan Crenshaw, these guys not a hero. He's a cartoon character, right? And without a gerrymandered district, he wouldn't even be in Congress. None of these. Same with Jim Jordan. You want to talk about a gerrymandered district? And Jim Jordan should obviously be in jail for allowing students to get molested by his coach. And he couldn't stand up for, wrestlers. If you can't stand up for kids in a college getting abused in a shower, do I really supposed to buy that you're standing up for a bunch of soldiers on the battlefield that you would have sent there in a heartbeat?
And George Clooney's going to have a film about that, isn't he? I thought he was producing one.
He is a documentary, and I can't wait for it to come out. But it's more of the same. That the larger point I'm trying to make is that the right has been so brainwashed, they don't accept anything anymore. They're not. If you can't see clearly who Trump is, just on the sexual predation stuff, then you're and I get those messages every day, like, Biden's the pedophile, blah, blah, blah. I mean, these people are brainwashed and they think they're fighting a holy war. It's the same thing as somebody who straps a bomb on themselves and gets on a bus in Israel. These people are broken. They're broken. Americans are broken now. The anger in this country. I live on a road where you have to pull off kind of a main road to pull in my driveway. And whenever I have to stop to make a left into my driveway, the car behind me, you can just feel they're angry that they have to stop for a second. And when you finally make the turn, they always rev their engine like super loud to show their displeasure and peel away. What happened to America that we do that now? And that's a common occurrence. That's every time I get in the car. There's no more like, hey, that's my neighbor. That could be my grandmother. That could be my kid's teacher turning into that. Why don't I wait 30 seconds? No, it's this aggressive, toxic, you got in my way. This anger, this thing that used to just be reserved for like getting on the subway in New York City is now like, dude, you're pulling into Party Central in a suburban strip mall. Like, what are you so mad about? You know what I'm saying? But it's that anger. That is a sickness and a disease in this country. And Trump is a master at exploiting that. And now there's 1,000 Trumps, right? There's Trumps everywhere. And the more they scream on videos and stuff, the more likes they get, the more coverage they get. nobody knew who Lauren Boebert was a couple years ago. Now she's a household name. She didn't even get she got her GED. She can't spell impeach. You know what I mean? And she's bought by an oil company. She's only there to allow like mineral interests to take over in Colorado. She's selling out a state of natural beauty for fame and fortune. Yeah. And we're letting it, and people are cheering it on, and also people on the left, they don't really know what to do about it, right? Donate to me, make another video, I'll fight back. Nope, you're just part of the same thing. We haven't found the solution for this yet, and we're looking to old ways to solve this. It ain't going to happen. The people who have so much faith in the Justice Department tend to be older white people, right?
Well, and it wasn't like when AG Garland walked in, he cleaned house with the DOJ. He kept most of the people there. And just personally, I knew the country was broken when you had a kid wheelchair bound begging his school board to allow him to go to school so that he could learn. People with disabilities shouldn't have to beg for an education and have basic common decency, not just for themselves, but for their classmates. The things we're asking for is fulfilling the social contract that our country promised us when we were born here. It's nothing more than what anyone would expect from a decent society.
Yeah, but they view it as an entitlement, Jimmy.
Well, right, because they're only entitled to an education as a white man.
Right. I know.
It's we're in a dangerous place. It can't be exaggerated anymore. We're there,
No, it's scary. It's scary. It's as scary as the ghost story I told last week, which apparently the viewers liked,
Yeah.
Have you ever seen The Exorcist, Jimmy?
Only parts. And I saw it when the head turned around 180 degrees. So that's still scarred in the memory pretty good.
That thing, the Exorcist was filmed in Georgetown, the movie, right? The William Friedkin movie. Yeah. But The actual Exorcist was based on a real thing. And it was something that people believed really happened. And I lived in the town called Mount Rainier, Maryland, where the real Exorcist happened in the late 60s. And it happened to a kid. It wasn't a boy who apparently moved to Ohio and stuff. But obviously, right? But this was the lore of the town. So when you lived in Maryland, in the late 70s, early 80s, you always heard about the real Exorcist, or if you were near there, you did. So I moved to that town in 7th grade, and I went to like cotillion at this Catholic church where the real priests performed this thing in the late 60s. And it was a boy. As I said, it was like a teenage boy, and they thought he was possessed. And 2 priests from the local parish, diocese or whatever, went and performed an exorcism, and I'm not saying that part's real, because like, really, the devil, you know what I mean? Like, that's all superstition stuff anyway. But this was a real story in this town, right? And apparently, like, they performed the exorcism. The house that it happened in burned down like the next day, and it was on this plot of land that was considered hallowed ground when I lived there. We're talking 1983 or something, 82, right? And everyone knew like that was the Exorcist's house. So when I moved to this town, I had some friends who lived across the street. I remember sitting on their porch and being like, is that the Exorcist plot? I was like fascinated by it. And they would tell me the stories. And like, so the 2 priests performed the exorcism. One of them had a heart attack, like performing the exorcism, and died, right? Then the house burned down. Then the other priest didn't speak about it again for like 15 years. And then he spoke about it at Sunday Mass once, like 15 years later. And then like he died, like in his sleep that night. So the whole town was like freaked out about this. Okay.
Yeah.
So I had a friend. I moved to this town in like 7th grade. It's right on the border of DC. And I had a friend who came to visit me from my old neighborhood, my best friend, Abdullah. And he came to visit me, and I was like, hey, you want to go see the Exorcist house? And it was like this time of year, it was like October. There's no leaves on the trees. It was like spooky. This town is like old Maryland, kind of, old little Victorian homes and stuff, kind of just, time forgotten stuff at the time, so it was already kind of spooky. And I was like, let's go see the Exorcist house, and it was dark, it was like 7, 8 at night. And I walk him up there, and we're across the street, and I'm like, there it is, dude. There's the plot of land. that it happened on. And he was already freaked out. And I was like, let's cross the street. Come on, let's get a little closer. And I get him to cross the street. And the plot was like stone walls and then this just grass that people didn't even mow, just like weeds and stuff, you know? And I get him across the street up to the wall and I'm like, check this out. Isn't this creepy? And he's like, man, we should get out of here right now. I was like, let's walk up on there. And he's like, no, dude, no, you know? And I'm like, come on, let's climb up on there. He's like, no. And I hop up on there and I'm like, Satan, come into me now. And he freaked out and ran like 3 blocks, whatever. He was like 3 blocks in 40 seconds. He was just screaming and running the other direction. It freaked him out and scared him so bad, you know? So that's
Power
not
of Christ compels you.
Exactly. So would you be scared in that circumstance, Jimmy?
100%. You're never seeing me again.
Exactly. That's how my man was. He was back. He ran all the way back to my house and was just like, you motherfucker. But I thought it was funny, you know? And because I'd already seen ghosts and stuff, you know, like I'm not really scared of that sort of thing. And I certainly don't believe in the devil, but they believe in this town, you know, they did. Yeah. So, and, you know, The Exorcist is probably the greatest horror movie ever. You should watch it if you like that stuff. It's pretty scary.
It's been a long time. Yeah. I watched This Is the End, where they do a parody of that scene, you know.
Nice.
And Power of Christ isn't that compelling. You know, they like make fun of it and all that. We talked about reincarnation last week. I have a quick one. After my grandfather died of cancer, everybody started seeing praying mantises everywhere, you know, in a couple weeks after my grandpa had passed. And one day my grandma gets in her car and there's a praying mantis on her windshield, right? And she drives, gets gas, goes to bingo, because that's what she would do after my grandfather passed, stayed on her car, and then she gets done with bingo, ends up winning, and there's a praying mantis on her bingo card. You know, and then a couple weeks after that, my aunt bought a new house. There was a praying mantis on the mailbox. Around this time of year, there's always praying mantises around my house for my birthday, you know. So another example of my family, we think they're around when we see pieces of nature like that in critical times, especially shortly after we lose somebody. So Absolutely. Just wanted to share that with everyone.
Yeah, man. And I love praying mantises. I have them all over my property and they're deeply spiritual. You know, they're praying mantises, you know. Yeah. I just saw one the other day. Last year, one of them crawled on my head and I did a video and put it on Twitter of the praying mantis. That was going to be my original podcast host, was going to be a praying mantis, you know, and they come and hang out at my studio and stuff. You should watch their heads, how they move. You know, there's such intelligence in nature. People think like, oh, humans are the only smart creatures. It's not even close. An octopus is like incredibly complex. It's like an elephant or something. All of these creatures are. From chipmunks to bugs to butterflies, ants, you know, ants, you step on an ant and see what the other ants do. You know, they go and freak out and get the body and bring it back to their thing. Like if it has eyes and it's moving, it's the same sort of thing. And even if it isn't, trees are talk to each other for their root systems and stuff. Trees are living creatures. There's so much presence in trees. You should read Luna, Legacy of Luna. Do you know who Julia Butterfly Hill is?
I haven't heard of her.
Yeah, she's before your time. She's a hero who went and climbed up in this redwood tree that they were going to cut down, that this logging company was going to cut down like this 200-year-old tree. So as a form of protest, she climbed up into the tree and stayed there for like a year. So the lumber company couldn't cut down this tree called Luna. And then she was in this old growth forest and got hip to the energy that trees have. You know, trees are living creatures. Trees are just as alive as you and me, Jimmy, you know, and they have a lot of energy and stillness. Like I'm a tree hugger. In a literal sense, I will hug a tree because I can feel the energy. You know, I have a tree out in my yard that's like something like 1853. The house was built in 1853, and I'm assuming that the tree is pretty like not long after that. You know, so this tree was on the property when Lincoln was president. And it's still growing and it still has green leaves every spring, you know, and it's still about to drop its leaves. And there's wisdom in nature, you know, and when you lose it, I read this horrible article this week in Brazil and Ecuador. They're cutting down big swaths of rainforest to build military bases now because they want oil companies to come in there and they want to be able to promise them that they'll be protected, their economic interests. And that's just stunningly irresponsible and will be the death of our planet, because that sort of thing is happening everywhere. Climate change is on us now, and the rainforest is like the Earth's lungs, and we've been almost ceded that battle, right? When I was a kid, it was save the rainforest and stuff, and now you barely even hear about that, because you got Bolsonaro and all these dictators in the Southern Hemisphere now, because what Trump did is a global thing now, right? Like Putin didn't have to win the Cold War. He's won this war, in a way, or he's winning this war. He's allowing the sort of authoritarian oligarchy system to become very appealing on large parts of this globe. And it's being fueled by anger and disenfranchisement that isn't real. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, people think they're not getting theirs, but they are. You wake up in the morning, you got yours. If the sun comes up and you're breathing, there's hope in your life. If your heart's beating, you got a chance at redemption. It's one day at a time. We should view this the way you view addiction. When you're trying to get sober, you don't think about like, well, how am I not going to drink at my wedding if I give up drinking today? No, you just give up drinking today. Your life becomes 24 hours at a time. What's the next right action I need to do? Where are my feet right now? How do I stay present? And that's what nature can teach us, right? Tree knows where its roots are. Trees sitting, a tree bends in the high winds, right? It doesn't get brittle and break off. It bends, it changes. And that's what we need to do. We need to understand that everything that we experience isn't necessarily out to hurt us. You know what I mean? Because a lot of this stuff is based on fear. That's what Trump and these guys manipulate, fear. Haitians are coming to, no, they're not coming to do anything to you, right? They're looking for a safe place to raise their kids and a decent place to live and work and contribute to society. They will be heroes. Let them in, right? Ted Cruz is not a hero. These skeptical men that are trying to gin up, this kind of racial hatred. Fox News has gone full white nationalist. Tucker Carlson was talking about eugenics this week in response to Haitians, saying they're trying to replace white people. Okay. And if you had to replace anybody, I'd start with the white people, right? Like, as I always say, go do white people shit. No one's getting rid of you. Just go hang out on the golf course, play golf, step aside, let other people lead.
Right.
Why do you have to dominate the whole thing forever? Our track record basically sucks anyway. Like, oh yeah, another white man in charge. It's worked out so well for so long. Fuck that. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I would compare it to like physical therapy. When I was 2 or 3 years old, up until the time I was in my teenage years, you did physical therapy every day so that by the time I'm an adult now at 27, I don't necessarily need a walker to get from point A to point B. Like, that's life. That's how you grow as a person. You need to experience suffering at some degree in order to have better understanding of the world around you. We've put so many people in cocoons of comfort, including adults. I saw some of those videos from the school board meetings, man. They're banging on the doors, they're children that never grew up. That's what happened.
Exactly. That's well
and it's as a 27-year-old, I'm looking at these 50 and 60-year-olds like, who the hell raised you? How did this happen to you at this point?
Yeah, who hurt you, as people say. A lot of people hurt, and suffering is part of life. That's what the Buddha talked about, and you just have to sort of accept this and surround everything with awareness and presence, and you'll get through it. It's almost the avoidance of pain has become, an epidemic. People think their lives are just supposed to be, so easy, and they live in so much fear that they're willing to screw other people out of their shot at happiness because they're coming from like a viewpoint of like, I have to kill them before they kill us. It's this caveman mentality where nobody has like the ability to sort of live in harmony anymore. Walk out with a brave, open heart in the world. You know, what do you think's going to happen? You know, what's going to happen? Show up for love. You know, love without attachment. People think love is like, I'm in love with her and I'm shutting everything else out. I got to do for mine and my family. Yeah, you provide for the people around you, but real love, love without attachment, is a love for everything. You know, it's like saying, I like the violin and blocking out the rest of the symphony and calling that love. That's not love. That's an attachment. That's a mental state that's going to keep you locked in to a certain way of thinking. And it's going to do the opposite of what real love is. It's going to block you out from the symphony of life, right? It's going to make you think, oh, I don't have to accept and open my heart to these Haitians because I'm protecting my white Christian family up in Abilene here, right? That's not love. You've closed yourself off to life. Life is giving you love and the opportunity to love, because that's what we're here to do. We're here to love, Jimmy. That's it. And live our potential in the hopes that that will inspire and help others. Okay? You're here to help somebody else. You're not here to get yours, because you can't take it with you. The only thing you can take with you is love. The only thing that really lasts is love. That's the only legacy we really have. Right. Nobody cares how much money you made on the other side, you know, and if you screwed people over to make that money, you got another thing coming, you know, you're poor. That's poverty. That's not love. You know, economic success is not love. It doesn't fill you up inside, you know, and we live in a land that values that above all else, right? Everyone's like, I'm going to be a billionaire, you know? I know, you know, I got like 7 billionaires live in my town, you know, none of them are like, oh, that's a great dude, you know, like hardly any of them, because money kind of like shuts you off from understanding how it really works. Because then you think, well, I have all this money, I have to keep protecting it, I have to keep growing it, you know?
Right. Well, and you know, my dad was an entertainer in Indianapolis around the state of Indiana and would go to Illinois or Ohio for an occasional gig, but he always wanted to come home. You know, he wasn't about touring or having a career in music because he valued his family and he viewed himself as successful because he raised me and he was a good husband to his wife. You know, that should be good enough for a majority of Americans to just be a good person and to try to elevate your community. You know, not everybody's going to be Elvis Presley. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can see the beauty in what is around your little part of the world, you know?
Yeah. And Elvis Presley dated a 15-year-old, you know, and
Right.
used his limo to drop her off at high school when she was living at Graceland. You know, he waited till she was 21 to marry her, but like, try getting away with that today, Elvis.
No kidding.
Right? Not to mention he was a racist and he stole his music from black folks. You know, there's that little element too, you know, not saying Elvis wasn't good, but you know, anyway, I was
appropriated the culture, you know?
Yeah, I like Ricky Nelson. I was a Ricky Nelson guy. Steven Stills told me that too. He's like, for my money, he was better than Elvis. And I agree. But Elvis had a great guitar player. And speaking of guitar players, I talked about Eric Clapton last week.
Yeah.
I guess I told people I'd tell the rest of the story. So Clapton, God knows what happened to him, because he was a good dude in sobriety. You know, he had long-term sobriety. He funds a rehab called Crossroads down in Antigua. A lot of my friends have gone through that program. You know, I thought he was basically a decent guy. And when I worked with him, he was auctioning off a big chunk of his guitar collection to have the proceeds go to Crossroads, which is a rehab, you know? Right. So he was basically always a good dude in my book until his last year. And I know about when he was a drunk and all that kind of stuff and his racist tirades, which were awful. And he shouldn't have gotten away with at the time, you know, and it shows you sort of white rock and roll privilege, because the guy was going out on stage, getting drunk and berating his fans and stuff. And he kept touring. Robert Stigwood, his manager, kept him on the road, and venues kept, you know, booking him because it was the 70s and nobody cared. You know, today, if you showed up that drunk and on drugs at a gig, like, you wouldn't have the next gig.
Right.
You know, I remember I was in Sweden doing a show with Jackson Brown, and the guy, like the PA guy, local runner who was working with me, goes, yeah, last night we had Whitney Houston here. And I'm like, Whitney Houston, why did you have Whitney? And I love Whitney. and I'll tell you Whitney stories. I worked on shows with Whitney. I stayed in Telluride in the same fancy hotel she was at once. I loved Whitney Houston, but she was suffering from really bad drug addiction, obviously in her final years, and this was towards the end. And I'm like, what do you mean you had Whitney Houston here? She shouldn't be on the road. And he's like, yeah, some manager booked her. We did a gig. And he showed me video, and it was like she barely got through one song, and it was just incoherent and awful. And I remember being like, God, like, who's allowing this? It was the same thing with the girl, like the British singer. My buddy was playing drums in a band with her, and she was like on the road. And I was
Amy
like,
Winehouse?
Yeah. Okay. She was on the road one summer, and I was like, she's going to be dead. Like, he sent me videos of like, look, she did one song and then sat down on the stage drunk, and she was dead within, you know what I mean? Like, so my point is, if you got really bad drug and alcohol problems, you have no business being on the road, but the 70s, it was an industry where people were making money off it, and everybody was kind of on drugs anyway. Right. So Clapton got away with all that stuff. He eventually gets sober. He's a guitar player. I'm a guitar player. So you have a lot of reverence for Clapton. So we end up on this show together called Sheryl Crow and Friends. And it was in 1999, and it was a big concert in Central Park. It was live on VH1 or something like that. And you had Sandra Bullock was there. I think she was hosting. Not Sandra Bullock, Sandra Bernhard, the great Sandra Bernhard, the comic. And you had the Dixie Chicks, who were brand new. I got to work with them. They sort of had they had the #1 album in the country that week. Wide Open Spaces had just come out. You had Sheryl Crow, obviously, was like the main act. And then you had like Clapton and Keith Richards. Okay. So I had to deal with all these people, and Bill Murray. And Bill Murray was a trip. And like, I had to try to bring Bill Murray on stage to rehearse. And he wouldn't he's like, no, I'm not going to rehearse. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to say what I'm going to say. And I'm like, no, they're making you, come on, please come rehearse. He's like, do you guys even know who I am? Have you seen Saturday Night Live? Like, I'm not rehearsing, you hired Bill Murray. I'm going to go out there. Like, he was not playing the Hollywood BS game. And I was the poor schmuck who had to try to get him to go on stage, and rehearse his intro or something. And it wasn't happening. And I ran into him at the party later, and he got off an elevator. It was at the Four Seasons in the basement in New York. And he gets off the elevator. He's got like 3 beautiful women on each arm or something. And I was like, hey, Bill, sorry, I'm the guy who had to be a dick to you earlier about going on stage. He's like, sorry, I was a dick to you too. I was like, nobody's cooler than Bill Murray, right? But we're doing this whole gig, and like, the rehearsal was the day before. It was in Central Park, like North Lawn area. And the late John Cossette was producing it. His dad was Pierre Cossette, who produced the Grammys forever and stuff. Legendary live TV people. So real A-team gig. And they're like, Clapton's coming, bring him to his trailer or whatever. So I bring him down to his trailer. He pops in there, pops out a minute later. And he's like, hey, I'm going to go for a walk in Central Park, And I'm like, okay, well, I got to go with you. Sorry, it's my job, So I had to sort of like trail him, and we end up like doing this little walk in Central Park, which was kind of awkward, but he's Eric Clapton. So I'm like, all right, this is cool, And then we go back, I get the call on the radio, like, all right, we're ready for him on stage. And we go back up to stage, and he gets ready to play, right? He's got his guitar tech there, hands him a guitar. There's a Leslie cabinet right on the backstage, which is a swirling speaker that he uses for his tone, and he's about to walk on stage, and he's like, hey, what's your name again? I'm like, Noel. He's like, hey, Noel, I left my shirt down there in the trailer. He had a t-shirt on, he had like an overshirt. And I said, oh, it'll be fine. And he looks at me like, no. I'm like, oh, you want me to go get your shirt? He's like, yep. Right answer, go get my shirt. Like, he's thinking about his Armani shirt or whatever, So I run down, get the shirt. He goes on stage, starts playing. He's rehearsing. He plays White Room, which is a Cream song, like just killing it, killing this guitar solo. I'm basically sitting on the Leslie cabinet at this point, so I can feel the vibrations, of his playing and stuff. And he's he's like a hero as a guitar player. And I'm holding this shirt. And I went to drama school, right? So you have these sense memory kind of exercise things you do when you're playing a character. So I'm holding this Rock Legends shirt, and I'm like, for some reason, I'm like, I wonder what he smells like. You know, like I wonder what like the cologne like that Eric Clapton wears smells like. Because I'm holding this guy's shirt, this rock is wailing on this solo. And I'm like, in my head, I'm having this dialogue and I'm like, I'm going to smell his shirt, you know?
Yeah.
And I lift up his shirt and just like kind of sniff the collar. And I look over and this roadie is looking at me and he's just like, what are you doing? Like, what is wrong with you? You know, it was just funny. It was like the essence of Clapton. You know, I wasn't like smelling the armpit. It was just like the collar, you know, just
Right.
like, who is that, you know, this guy? And he comes off stage and he's like, hey, tomorrow, you know, they sent a Mercedes for me today. That's too much. Just, I'll get in a cab, you know, have some pizza for me here on the side of the stage and I'm good. Thanks
Right.
for your help, Noel. And he was chill. And I was like, wow, that was pretty chill, you know? And then Keith came and I've worked with Keith Richards before and like, yeah, that's a whole different thing, but I love Keith, you know? And I don't know if I should tell the Keith part of this story now, but you know, Keith is fun. Keith, like I had to give Keith an extra 5-minute warning to come out of his trailer, you know, on top of the 10 minutes to get to stage. And he finally comes out of his trailer and he's like, he makes like an airplane and he's like, wah, like flying around in this big circle. And then he flies over to me and puts his arm around me. And he goes, sorry, I just had to look at the park for a minute. I've done a lot of things here, but I've never played here before. And I was like, I'll bet you have. And he's like, ha, ha, ha. Like he laughed that I got his, you know, his pirate joke, you know? And then I brought him up, you know, to rehearse or whatever. And this was like the second night and Clapton was back, you know, at this point. And Clapton was sitting on an amp case on the far side of the stage, right? And I brought Keith up like stage left, Clapton's backstage, you know, stage right. So Keith goes and walks over to Clapton and sits down next to him on this amp case. And Clapton gets up without saying a word and walks away and completely disses Keith. And I'm sitting there with Keith's daughters, his wife. It was like embarrassing moment. And we're like, what a dick, you know? And then they ended up getting in a fight, basically not physical, but like argument. Keith took off his watch that Clapton had given him at his wedding and threw it at Clapton. It was just like, screw you then, man. And they didn't talk again for 10 years.
Wow.
And I don't know what their beef was about. I've talked about it with other people. Essentially, it's not my business or anyone's business, you know, it's personal. They've known each other since the early 60s, you know, but my guess was it had something to do with like sobriety or something at the time, you know, but I think I have to like look at that again. You know, I think that Clapton was the dick in that situation, you know, like, cause he just got up and walked away, dude. He didn't even be like, hey, Keith, I can't talk to you right now, or I'm mad at you. He just dissed him. He just turned his back and walked away to Keith Richards, who's like the coolest guy in the world. Keith is the most down to earth of the Rolling Stones, you know, besides Ron Wood, but Keith is just like a man's man. He'll treat you like you're just his best friend when you just met him, kind of. He doesn't have any airs. You know, when we would do the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame back at the Waldorf, he'd be in there BSing with the guy in the bathroom, you know, who worked at the hotel just as much as he'd be BSing. My favorite Keith story at the Rock Hall when we did those old things, the old inductions, was Paul Simon was getting inducted for his solo career. Paul Simon's really long-winded, not your favorite guy to work with. You know, I know he's a legend, but he's not. He's Paul Simon, okay? And so Paul's giving like this boring speech, and he's like 20 minutes into it, and everybody's kind of yawning. And Keith's at one of the front tables, obviously, and Keith just hops up and goes, "I gotta take a piss, mate." And just walks out of the room, and everyone's dying because it was just so droning on about Paul Simon. Thinks a lot about Paul Simon. You know what I mean? So that's Keith, you know, like, hey, this is rock and roll. This isn't like a lecture at Yale Literary Society. You know what I mean? But so Keith is the coolest guy, you know, and I'd always wondered about that moment, but seeing how Clapton has behaved in the last year, I'm just like, whatever Clapton did, screw him, you know? And you know, the guy's obviously made some great music. Like, there's no question, you know, he's benefited from that same misogynistic, you know, atmosphere of rock and roll. You know, some of his best work, you know, was taken from others and women and things like that. But That's the way it is. You know what I mean? That's the world we're living in. And now we're not going to accept that kind of stuff anymore. So I don't know what point there is to my story. It was a great party, by the way. The party after Sheryl Crow and friends, we did it in the Central Park. And Sarah McLachlan was there, who's one of my all-time favorite songwriters and just an incredible musician. And we're at the after party and Jewel was there. Right. And I had a crush on Jewel at the time, like who I still do, you know,
Right.
But I'm like, wow, there's Jewel, you know, and I'm talking with Sarah McLachlan. I'm like, I want to meet Jewel. She's like, I'm going to introduce you. I'll bring you over. And I'm like, oh my God, you know, and she brings me over to Jewel and was like, hey, Jewel, this is my friend Noel or whatever, you know, he worked on the show. And I go, hey, Jewel, I was at Woodstock 99 a couple of weeks ago. I saw your performance. It was really good. And she just looks at me like, oh, great. And walked away kind of.
Oh, no.
She thought I was one of those idiots who was like, show us your tits kind of thing. Cause she's like, oh, this guy's at Woodstock 99, like the worst gig in the history of gigs. You know, and I was trying to make the point because she tried to calm down the crowd. She berated these idiot misogynists, you know, and I thought it was amazing how she kept her cool, you know, and her dignity in that instance and was still able to perform. Because as you saw, we discussed the doc, it was a nightmare, you know, and I was trying to relay that, but I think I just, you know, I was probably 20, 30 at the time, you know, this was 99, right? So I would have been 28, you know, so she just saw me as like some knucklehead white boy who was at 99 and like smiling about what a great gig it was. So that's why Jewel and I aren't together to this day.
Yeah, that's the reason, man.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Oh man. Well, you know, you got to meet her. That's more than a lot of people get to do.
Absolutely. No, she's great. She's great. They're all great. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And, so that's about it for this week. You know, I'm looking for, you know, these rock and roll stories. I got a lot of them and I tell a lot of them in my live act. You know, I do a lot of jokes and then I kind of stretch out and tell some stories, the inspiring ones, you know, because there's all kinds of great things that happen. And that's why I got in the music business and the entertainment business. I want to be inspired. You know, that's what art does at its best. You know, it helps us get through the day. Springsteen had a birthday this week. Springsteen is the master of that. You know, the reason I'm in this business is probably Bruce Springsteen. You know, I sat up at his concert, you know, in 1985 at the end of the Born in the USA tour. And he told this story about his dad when he came back from the draft board. And it was so intimate that I got goosebumps. And I was like, dude, I just met you. Like, why are you telling me this? You know, I got that feeling like if you meet somebody at a bar and they sort of tell you something that's a little too intimate, you just met them and you get uncomfortable. And I got that feeling as Bruce is telling this story. And then I look around and I'm like, there's 75,000 people here. You know, I'm on the upper tier of Giant Stadium, and this guy just made me feel real emotion and real intimacy and real commonality. And I'm like, that's magic. That's what I want to be a part of, because that shows us our humanity, that helps us understand each other. And that's what we need now more than ever. We need to realize we're all part of the same thing. It's the right hand fighting the left, but we're part of the same body. You know, if somebody who grew up like you can't go to school, Jimmy, somebody who is willing to prosper despite, you know, the hand you were dealt, right? And you weren't asking for a lot. You just want equal access, right? You just want to be able to get in a wheelchair and go to school and not die, you know?
Yeah.
That's not too much to ask, is it? You know?
Give me a chance. Yeah.
Exactly.
And to add on to your story, about Bruce Springsteen. My dad was my Bruce Springsteen, you know, the most skilled, talented guy I know, you know, and I have his namesake. So to say that, you know, you learn from your heroes and your mentors that humanity, I got to learn it from my dad, you know, and he instilled it in me. So I'm doing it because this is what my dad would want for me and for everybody else.
Well, there you go. I didn't really have that dad kind of relationship. You know, I was always missing a dad in my life, kind of. So the rock stars were my dads, you know, the Jackson Brown, Bruce Springsteen, guys I looked up to and guys that seemed like they cared about making this world a better place, you know, and kicking ass while they're doing it, you know, do it with some style. Let's have fun. It's not all, you know, it's Saturday night tonight, baby. You know what I mean? Grab your girl, dance, forget about the week. and have some fun. That's what we need to get back to as a nation. We need to have some fun. We need to come together. If you want to do that at a comedy show, you can come see me on November 18th in Norwalk, Connecticut at the wonderful Wall Street Theater. Tickets are available on my website, noelcasler.com, and you can check out the link on my Twitter. And until then, we'll see you next week. Jimmy, what do you want to say to the folks?
Check out jdkonair.com for all of my stuff. And my 27th birthday is going to be on the 30th next week. So DM me, wish me happy birthday. It's going to be a good time. Another year older, another year wiser. Things can change, folks. I was working at a gym a year ago, and now I'm on a podcast with Noel trying to build a product, So if you want your life to change, it can. You just got to be willing to have an open heart. That's all.
There you go. Jimmy had an actual job a year ago, and now he's working for free on a free podcast. So dreams do come true, folks.
I'm building it, baby.
Slide into Jimmy's DMs for his birthday. I don't know what that meant, ladies, but I'll leave that to the two of you guys to figure it out.
That's up to them.
All right.
Completely up to them.
Damn. Like, it's my birthday, lady. Slide into the DMs. Hook a brother up. All right. Jimmy's blushing, guys. I don't know if you can see it. Jimmy's blushing now.
You can now. Okay.
He's heading into his Saturn return, 27. That's when Cobain and all these guys, Jim Morrison and stuff. 27, it hits you. It is the Saturn return, because you're no longer a kid. You're starting to come into adulthood a little bit, but it's a good year. You'll have a good time, Jimmy. We'll do many more episodes. But for now, this is episode 30 of the Noel Casler podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next week, folks. Be safe out there and take care of each other. Thank you.